Well, I, 72M, never thought I'd be writing this on Reddit at my age. My daughter helped me set up this account because I needed to get this off my chest. 40 years of teaching high school mathematics, careful saving, and planning for retirement, all gone because I trusted family. I'm using a throwaway account because this is embarrassing enough without my remaining family finding out I'm posting about it online. I guess I should start from the beginning. I retired 5 years ago after 4 decades of teaching at Lincoln High. My wife Martha and I had it all planned out. We'd travel a bit, spend time in her garden, maybe finally take those cooking classes she always wanted to try. We weren't rich, but we had our house paid off, decent savings, and my pension. It wasn't fancy, but it was comfortable. Then Martha got sick. Cancer. It moved fast. Within 6 months, she was gone. We'd been married 45 years. Met when we were both 19 at a church social. She was the prettiest girl there, wearing this blue dress that matched her eyes. Never thought she'd look twice at a skinny math nerd like me, but somehow she did. Losing her 3 years ago left this huge hole in my life. Our house felt too big and empty without her. 4 bedrooms, big yard, it was perfect when our kids were growing up, and later when the grandkids would visit. But alone? Every empty room just reminded me she was gone. The garden she loved started looking shabby because I could never keep up with it like she did. That's when Jake, my oldest grandson, started coming around more often. He'd stop by after work, sometimes bringing groceries or helping with yard work. He got the lawn service to fix up Martha's garden, said it was his treat, wanting to preserve his grandmother's memory. Looking back, I should have seen he was buttering me up, but at the time, I was just grateful for the company. Jake always was the ambitious one. Got his business degree from state, landed a job at some finance company right out of college. Always talked about investments, market trends, cryptocurrency, stuff that went right over my head. My other grandkids were different. Sarah's a nurse, working crazy hours but loving every minute of it. Tommy's 24, still taking community college classes and working at the mall. But Jake seemed to have it all figured out. About a year ago, Jake started dropping comments about my finances. He'd see my retirement account statements on the kitchen table and shake his head. Said I was losing money letting it sit in low-yield accounts. Kept showing me these complicated charts on his phone about investment returns. I tried explaining that I was comfortable with my conservative investments, Martha and I had planned it that way. But he was persistent. Then he started in about the house. Property taxes in our area had gone up, that part was true. Jake said maintaining such a big house was eating into my retirement funds. He had this whole presentation worked out about how transferring the house to him would protect my assets. Said if I ever needed nursing care, having the house in his name would keep it safe for Medicare. He'd handle all the bills, maintenance, taxes, said I could just relax and enjoy retirement like I deserved. I resisted at first. Kept telling him I needed to think about it. That's when he started with the guilt trips. Said he was hurt that I didn't trust him, his own grandfather. Brought up all the times he'd helped me since Martha died. Asked if I thought he'd ever do anything to harm me. Made me feel like I was insulting him by hesitating. The papers he brought over were thick with tiny print. Jake said they were standard property transfer documents, nothing to worry about. Said he'd had his company's legal team review everything. When I mentioned maybe having my own lawyer look them over, he got offended. Said it was a waste of money since he was family. Even joked about how he'd learned from the best, said I taught him everything about doing the right thing. I know how stupid this sounds. 40 years teaching kids to think critically, and I couldn't see what was happening right in front of me. But when you're alone, when your grandson looks you in the eye and promises he's just trying to help. Well, I signed. Multiple papers, multiple places. Jake's finger pointing to each line, sign here, initial there. Said it was all routine. Everything changed within weeks. Jake said the house needed major renovations before it could be rented out, something about code violations and liability. Said I should move into an apartment temporarily while the work was done. He'd already found this small place across town, said it was just for a few months. Even helped me pack up some things, said he'd store the rest safely. That was 6 months ago. There haven't been any renovations, Jake moved in himself. Parked his new BMW in my garage. He's driving my car too, my late model Toyota that Martha and I bought new 3 years ago. Said it wasn't practical for me to keep it since the apartment has good bus access. Turns out those papers I signed didn't just transfer the house, they gave him control of most of my accounts too. Now I'm living in this tiny 1-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town. Jake gives me $800 a month for everything, rent, utilities, food, medications. Says he's protecting me from scammers by managing my finances. When I asked about my savings account, he showed me some complicated spreadsheet about investment distributions and management fees. None of it made sense. I finally broke down and told my daughter Lisa last week. She was horrified. Turns out Jake had been telling everyone a different story, said I wanted to downsize, that I'd asked him to manage everything because it was too overwhelming. Made himself sound like this caring grandson, sacrificing his time to help his elderly grandfather. Some family members even praised him for being so generous. Lisa's trying to find a lawyer, but Jake was thorough. Those documents look legal, even if they were obtained through manipulation. I handed over everything I spent my life building because I trusted my own flesh and blood. The house Martha and I bought when we were just starting out, where we raised our kids, where she planted her garden, all gone because I was too trusting. I feel like such a fool. 40 years teaching kids about logic and reasoning, and I couldn't see through my own grandson's lies. Now I'm stuck in this cramped apartment while he lives in my house, drives my car, and controls every penny of my money. My daughter says we'll fight this, but I know it could take years. At my age, I don't know if I have years left to fight. Update 1: The last 2 weeks have been an absolute nightmare. After my daughter Lisa helped me file a police report about Jake's financial exploitation, everything went downhill fast. The police basically shrugged it off, said it was a civil matter since I'd signed the documents willingly. One officer even suggested I might want to work things out within the family instead of pressing charges against my own grandson. Jake found out about the police report the same day, probably has friends at the station. He showed up at my apartment unannounced, all hurt and offended. Started this big performance about how betrayed he felt, how he couldn't believe his own grandfather would accuse him of theft. Even brought flowers, like he was visiting some sick relative in the hospital. Then he launched into this rehearsed speech about how he was just trying to protect me from myself. Said I was getting forgetful, making poor decisions. Brought up how I'd missed a dentist appointment last month and sometimes forgot to take my blood pressure medication. Kept saying things like remember when we discussed this about conversations that never happened. Made me question my own memory for a minute. The worst part was when he pulled out his phone and started showing me photos of my old house, his house now, I guess. Had all these pictures of maintenance issues I'd supposedly neglected. A loose gutter here, some peeling paint there. Used them to justify why he had to take over, saying the place was falling apart under my care. Never mentioned that most of those issues started after Martha died, when I was too deep in grief to notice much of anything. What really got me was how he tried to turn this all around on Lisa. Said she was jealous of his success, bitter that he had a better relationship with me than her kids did. Brought up how she hadn't visited as much when Martha was sick, never mind that she was working double shifts at the hospital to pay for her own kids' college. Even suggested she might be after my money herself. The manipulation worked better than Jake probably hoped. My sister Ellen called me the next day, all worried about my confusion and suggesting maybe Jake should have full power of attorney just to be safe. Said she'd noticed me getting forgetful at the last family reunion. Failed to mention that was right after Martha's funeral when I was barely functioning. Then my other grandson Tommy sent this long text about how unfair I was being to Jake. Said I should be grateful someone was willing to look after me in my old age. This from the kid who borrowed $5,000 from me last year for community college and still hasn't paid it back. Guess blood really is thicker than water, especially when money's involved. But the real kick in the teeth came when Jake started renovating my house, our house, the one Martha and I bought when we were just starting out. He ripped out her beloved rose garden, the one she tended for 40 years. Put in some tacky hot tub instead. Sold her antique china cabinet that we brought over from England when her mother died. Called it decluttering and modernizing, like he was doing me a favor by erasing every trace of our life together. The lawyer Lisa found says we might have a case for elder financial abuse, but it could take forever to fight it in court. Meanwhile, Jake's burning through my life savings like it's monopoly money. Bought himself a new BMW last week, with my money, of course. When Lisa confronted him about it, he had the nerve to say he was investing in appreciating assets for my benefit. I tried talking to Jake's parents, my son Robert and his wife Susan. That went about as well as you'd expect. Robert got defensive, said Jake would never deliberately hurt me. Susan suggested I might be in the early stages of dementia, making accusations like this. Neither of them mentioned the new car in their driveway, probably another investment courtesy of my savings account. My son, the same kid I put through college by teaching summer school for 10 years straight. The same one who lived in our basement for 6 months after his first divorce, eating Martha's cooking and never paying a dime in rent. Now he's acting like I'm some senile old man who can't be trusted to manage his own life. Lisa's been my rock through all this. Drives me to appointments, helps with groceries when the allowance Jake gives me runs short. She's even working extra shifts at the hospital to help pay for the lawyer. I hate being a burden on her like this, but she won't hear of it. Says family takes care of family, the right way, not Jake's way. The hardest part is feeling so powerless. I spent my whole life being responsible, saving money, paying bills on time, keeping up with home maintenance. Now I have to ask permission to buy new shoes or get my prescriptions filled. Jake looks over every receipt, questions every purchase like I'm some irresponsible teenager. More updates will come as things develop. The lawyer says we need to document everything, build a solid case. But at my age, I don't know how much fight I have left in me. Sometimes I wish I could just wake up and find out this was all some bad dream, that Martha's still here and our family hasn't been torn apart by greed. Update 2: Everything finally came crashing down last week, but not how anyone expected. My granddaughter Sarah, who'd been working crazy hours at Metropolitan Hospital, came home early from her night shift and spotted Jake at the Coffee Bean near the hospital. He was meeting with some guy in an expensive suit, which wouldn't have caught her attention except she recognized the man from somewhere. Turns out the hospital had sent around a warning email about this character, James Morrison, a supposed investment advisor who'd been targeting elderly patients. Sarah told me she almost confronted them right there, but something made her hold back. Instead, she sat in the booth behind them and recorded their entire conversation on her phone. What she heard made her sick. Jake was laughing about how easy it was to manipulate me. Called me a senile old fool who'd sign anything if you acted concerned enough. Said I was so desperate for attention after Martha died that I practically handed him everything on a silver platter. The worst part was when he started bragging about his technique, how he'd slowly isolated me from family, planted seeds of doubt about my memory, made everyone think I was losing it. Morrison seemed impressed. Said Jake was a natural at this, better than his other associates. They talked about other seniors they'd scammed together, at least 4 others besides me. Jake had apparently been Morrison's inside man, using his clean-cut appearance and financial background to gain trust. They were planning to sell my house once the market improved, split the profits. Sarah took the recording straight to the police. Suddenly they were a lot more interested than when I tried reporting it before. Turns out Morrison was already under investigation for elder fraud in 3 counties, but they could never prove anything. Jake's name had come up in those cases too, always as the concerned grandson or nephew who'd helped the victim manage their assets. The police got a warrant to look at Jake's financial records. Found out he'd been running this scam for 2 years, even before Martha died. He'd targeted other seniors through his investment firm, but I was his biggest score yet. Over $800,000 in assets when you counted the house, savings, and investments. Lisa drove me to the police station to make a formal statement. Walking in there, seeing Jake in handcuffs, I thought it would feel good, like justice. Instead, I just felt tired. He wouldn't even look at me, just stared at the floor while they read the charges. Financial exploitation of an elder, fraud, conspiracy, the list went on. The family's in chaos. Robert and Susan are in denial, saying Jake must have been framed or pressured into it by Morrison. Ellen called crying, apologizing for not believing me. Tommy sent a text saying he felt like an idiot for defending Jake. Sarah's being hailed as a hero, but she says she just did what any decent person would do. The police found records of other victims in Jake's computer files. Detailed notes about how to gain trust, which documents to use, even scripts for manipulating family members. He had everything planned down to the smallest detail. The detective said it was one of the most sophisticated elder fraud operations she'd seen. They froze all Jake's accounts, including my old ones he'd taken control of. The legal process to get everything back in my name is starting, but it's complicated. Some of my money is just gone, spent on Jake's luxury cars, fancy vacations, and who knows what else. The house is still legally his for now, though the court put a hold on any sale. Morrison rolled over on Jake fast, took a plea deal in exchange for testifying. Said Jake was the mastermind, approached him with the scheme already planned out. Apparently, Jake had been planning this for years, even before Martha got sick. Just waited for the right moment when I was most vulnerable. The hardest part is knowing this wasn't some mistake or moment of weakness. Jake didn't fall in with a bad crowd or get pressured into anything. He deliberately targeted his own grandfather, spent years planning how to steal everything I'd worked for. Used my grief over Martha against me. That kind of calculated cruelty from your own flesh and blood, it's hard to wrap my head around. The lawyer says we have a strong case now, especially with Morrison's testimony and Sarah's recording. But nothing can fix the damage to our family. Some betrayals cut too deep to heal. Update 3: the case is finally moving through the courts. Jake's facing multiple felony charges for elder fraud and financial exploitation. His lawyer tried to pitch some story about gambling debts and desperation, but the evidence against him was too solid. Morrison's testimony about their other victims sealed the deal. The district attorney offered me a deal, testify against Jake in exchange for a lighter sentence. My son Robert showed up at my apartment, begging me not to do it. Said Jake was family, that prison would ruin his life. Called me heartless for even considering it. I had to remind him that Jake didn't think about family when he was stealing from his own grandfather. The house is still tied up in legal proceedings. Jake's facing liens from his other victims now that they've come forward. 3 other seniors lost their savings to him and Morrison. One lady in her 80s had to move in with her daughter after Jake cleaned out her accounts. Hearing their stories made me realize how lucky I was that Sarah caught him when she did. My blood pressure got so bad during all this that I landed in the hospital for 3 days. Sarah was my nurse, kind of ironic. She's the one who really saved me, both times. The doctors say I need to reduce stress, but that's not easy when you're testifying against your own grandson in criminal court. The family's split down the middle now. Robert and Susan haven't spoken to me since I agreed to testify. They're telling everyone I'm destroying the family out of spite. Ellen and Lisa stand firmly behind me. Tommy's caught in the middle, but at least he stopped defending Jake. The prosecutor says most of my money is gone for good. Jake spent a lot of it, and what's left is tied up in assets they're still trying to trace. The BMW's been seized, and they're working on reversing the house transfer, but it's slow going. I'm still in this tiny apartment, living on my pension and what Lisa can spare. Sarah and Lisa helped me look at some senior apartments closer to them. Found a decent place with a small garden plot, not like Martha's, but maybe I can plant a few of her favorite roses. The rent's reasonable, and it's near Lisa's house. She says having me closer will make it easier to help out. It's strange how life turns out. I spent 40 years teaching kids about math, about logic and consequences. Now my own grandson's headed to prison because he never learned those basic lessons about right and wrong. Part of me still remembers him as a little boy, sitting on my lap while I explained fractions using cookie pieces. But that little boy grew into someone who could steal from his own family without remorse. The court date's set for next month. I know what I have to do. Jake might be my grandson, but if I let him get away with this, he'll just find other victims. More seniors who saved all their lives, only to have it stolen by someone they trusted. I can't let that happen. Martha would be heartbroken seeing our family like this, but she'd understand. She always said doing the right thing isn't about being nice, it's about being honest, even when it hurts. So I'll testify. Not for revenge, but because it's right. Sometimes that's all we can do.